Hi guys! Tonight we're stepping into a world before recipes, before menus, before anyone could complain that the cheese board was a little too expensive. The air is cool, the ground is dark with evening damp, and somewhere beyond the firelight, goats shift and murmur in the grass. Imagine the first people who tasted milk that had changed overnight. Was it spoiled? Was it magic? Was it dinner trying to become something more interesting? You stand with them at the edge of discovery, hearing the soft clink of clay, smelling smoke, wool, warm animals, and fresh milk. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you're getting comfortable, comment where you're listening from and what your local time is, because somewhere, someone else is drifting through ancient dairy history at a wildly inappropriate hour. Now, dim the lights, and let the first darkness gather around a settlement where history has not yet learned to write itself down. You are standing in the long morning of human farming, thousands of years before cities rise in stone and kings begin carving their important opinions onto monuments. Around you, life is quieter, but not simpler. The people here know the weather by smell. They know which plants feed a hungry child and which ones should be left alone. Thank you very much. They know the sound of a nervous goat, the weight of a full udder, and the way milk feels when it streams warm into a clay bowl, pale and alive beneath the hand. This is the Neolithic world, the age when humans begin living more closely with animals that can be milked. Sheep, goats, and cattle are no longer only hunted at a distance. They are watched, guarded, bred, argued with, and occasionally chased when they make poor decisions near a fence. You feel the settlement waking around you. Dogs bark in short bursts. A baby cries, then settles. Someone scrapes ash from a hearth. The air carries the grassy smell of dung, hay, smoke, and human skin warmed by work. Milk is precious here. It is not a casual beverage poured into a tall glass beside a plate of cookies. There are no cookies. For one thing, which feels rude, but history is doing its best. Milk is a living food, rich with fat, sugar, and protein. It spoils quickly in heat, it changes if ignored, and for many early adults, fresh milk is not always kind to the stomach. Long before most humans evolve strong adult lactose tolerance, milk can be difficult to digest. But when milk becomes curd, when whey drains away and fermentation begins its quiet work, it becomes gentler, denser, and more durable. Cheese, in that sense, is not just delicious. It is a solution. You watch someone kneel near a low bowl, lifting a cloth that smells faintly sour. Inside, milk is separated into soft white clumps floating in watery whey. Nobody calls it chemistry yet. Nobody says casein proteins, bacterial cultures, or enzymatic coagulation. But the body understands before language does. The fingers press into something cool, yielding, and strange. It is milk you can hold. One mainstream fact sits gently at the centre of this moment. Cheese is almost certainly one of the oldest processed foods in human history, born soon after people began milking domesticated animals. Archaeologists have found ancient pottery with traces suggesting milk processing from very early farming communities. Some vessels have little holes, as if they were used to drain curds from whey. You can picture them in your hands, rough ceramic strainers, humble and brilliant, not glamorous, perhaps, but neither is a colander, and civilization continues to rely on those. There is no single inventor standing proudly beside a wheel of cheese, waiting for applause. Cheese is not like a crown, a treaty, or a regrettable military campaign. It emerges through habit, through heat, through storage, through hunger, through someone noticing that milk left in the right container becomes something else, and that the something else keeps longer, travels better, and fills the belly. You walk beside a herder who carries milk in a pouch made from an animal's stomach. The pouch swings against the hip, the day is warm, the path is uneven. Inside, the milk sloshes softly, mixing with natural rennet from the stomach lining. By evening, the liquid has thickened. Curds have formed, and there it is. Perhaps not the first cheese, but a very convincing candidate. Historians still argue whether the earliest cheese came from deliberate experimentation, accidental storage in stomach bags, or repeated observation of milk souring in clay and skin containers. The truth may be less dramatic and more human. Many discoveries happen not in one shining instant, but in small repeated moments. Someone forgets a pot. Someone tastes carefully. Someone does not become ill. Someone tries again. Eventually, a family tradition is born, and much later, a food historian tries to reconstruct it while staring suspiciously at ancient residue. You're not in a world of abundance. The people around you measure survival in seasons. Grain must be protected from damp. Meat must be smoked, dried, or eaten before it turns dangerous. Fruit comes and goes, but milk is renewable, if the animals stay healthy and the herd survives. Cheese takes that brief gift and stretches it. You can feel the logic of it in your hands as you press curds together. The texture is soft at first, almost like wet chalk and cream. It squeaks faintly between your fingers. The whey runs over your skin, cool and slippery. A fly circles with great professional interest. The earliest cheeses are probably fresh, sour, and simple. No grand blue veins yet. No aged mountain wheels guarded like treasure. No tiny labels explaining that the goats were emotionally fulfilled and listened to lute music. Just curdled milk, drained and eaten soon. Perhaps salted where salt is available. Perhaps dried in the sun. Perhaps shaped into small lumps that can be carried. The taste is tangy, clean, a little wild. It carries the animal, the grass, the vessel, the hands that made it. Every batch is slightly different, because standardization has not yet arrived to make things convenient and a little boring. You sit near the fire as evening returns. The settlement glows low and amber. Smoke climbs in a thin column, and the smell of milk curds warms near the hearth. Someone stirs a pot. Someone else turns a small cake of pressed curd onto a mat of woven reeds. Children watch with the serious attention children give to food that might be shared. The animals settle into their pens, their bodies giving off heat. The atmosphere is close, earthy, and intimate, the way early village life must have been, with very little privacy and a strong sense that everyone knows who forgot to close the gate. A quirky little truth hides inside this ancient scene. Cheese may have helped humans use milk before fresh milk itself became easy for many adults to digest. That means cheese could have been less of a luxury and more of a clever workaround. Humanity did not wait patiently for genetics to catch up. Humanity curdled the problem, drained it, salted it, and ate it anyway. There is something wonderfully stubborn in that. The human stomach says, absolutely not, and the human hand replies, what about this version? You move through a day of work. Morning milking, midday heat, afternoon sorting of curds. There are no written recipes, but there is memory. You learn by watching. How long should the milk sit until it smells right? How much salt enough? When is done safe? Ask the elder with the sharp nose and sharper opinions. Knowledge lives in the body and in the senses. The ear hears bubbling fermentation. The eye reads the surface. The hand knows whether curd is too loose, too dry, too warm. The nose is the stern little judge of everything. This is social history in its softest form. Cheese begins not in palaces, but in hands that are cracked from labour. It belongs to people trying to feed families, to herders walking behind animals, to women and men sharing tasks that leave few monuments. You are not watching emperors. You are watching breakfast become technology. A bowl of curds is a food. Yes, but it is also a storage method, a nutritional strategy, and a quiet act of domestic genius. The grand story of cheese starts with ordinary people noticing what the world would allow. The landscape matters too. In a hot region, milk turns quickly, so fresh cheeses make sense In cooler places, curds can be kept longer. Where salt is near, preservation improves. Where caves or shaded pits hold steady temperatures, aging becomes possible, but not yet, not fully. For now, you remain near the beginning, where cheese is still tender and immediate. It has not conquered every culture yet. It has barely introduced itself. Still, you can feel its future hiding in the bowl. You lift a small piece to your mouth. It is cool, slightly grainy, sour at the edges, creamy at the centre. It tastes of pasture and smoke. It tastes like a question answered by accident. Around you, the settlement grows quiet except for low voices and the soft movements of animals. The stars appear without city lights to argue with them. Somewhere, milk is resting in a vessel. Somewhere, bacteria are doing their patient invisible work, which is frankly more than can be said for many later bureaucrats. And as sleep gathers at the edge of the fire, you understand why cheese endures. It is humble, but it is transformative. It takes something fragile and makes it last. It takes the passing gift of an animal and turns it into nourishment that can be carried, shared, traded, saved, before coins, before alphabets, before roads stitched continents together. There is this quiet miracle of curd and whey. You are holding one of humanity's earliest comforts, simple enough to fit in the palm, powerful enough to follow people wherever they go. You step into the heat of an ancient city where the streets are narrow, the walls are sun-baked, and the air seems to shimmer above packed earth. Somewhere nearby, a donkey complains with the tragic confidence of an animal, convinced that civilization has gone too far. The morning smells of dust, bread, river mud, sesame oil, and milk warming in shallow vessels. You hear sandals scraping stone, merchants calling from shaded stalls, and the soft splash of water drawn from a canal. Cheese has entered the world of cities now, and cities, as usual, immediately begin organising, taxing, selling, blessing, and arguing over it. In Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, food is not merely food. It is labour, record-keeping, temple supply, household rhythm, and state power. You walk past storerooms where jars are counted carefully, because ancient administrators may not have had email, but they absolutely had opinions about inventory. Clay tablets preserve records of dairy products, including milk, butter, and cheeses, showing that people in this region understood milk processing as part of organised economic life. The mainstream fact here is simple and important. Ancient Mesopotamian societies documented dairy production in writing, making cheese not just a village craft, but a managed resource. You pass a temple complex where offerings are prepared with serious attention. Grain, beer, dates, oil, and dairy products move through the hands of workers. The gods must be fed, or at least symbolically honoured, and the humans involved seem to do quite a lot of the carrying. In this world, cheese can belong to a meal, a ration, or a ritual. It is practical, but it also sits close to the sacred. You can almost feel the cool interior of a storeroom as you enter from the glare outside. Clay jars line the wall. The floor is swept hard. The air is thick with the smell of fermented milk, dry reeds, and earth. The cheese here is likely not uniform in the modern sense. It may be fresh and sour, pressed, salted, or mixed into other foods. It may be eaten with bread or dates, perhaps carried by workers, perhaps distributed in portions. You hold a small piece between your fingers. It is firm enough to break, pale and crumbly, with a salty tang that makes you suddenly understand why bread exists. Ancient people did not need a glossy food magazine to know that starch and cheese were good companions. Some truths announce themselves quietly and then never leave. Now the light shifts, and you are near the Nile, where the river spreads life through Egypt like a dark green ribbon laid across desert gold. The sound of water birds rises from the marshes. Flies hum in the heat. Linen brushes against skin. The smell is river mud, onions, smoke, cattle, and warm stone. Egyptian tomb art often shows cattle, milking, and food preparation, and physical evidence of ancient cheese has been found in Egyptian archaeological contexts. This matters because cheese here is not a rumour. It is something preserved by climate, burial, and the strange generosity of time. You enter a settlement where milk is handled quickly, because heat is a demanding instructor. People work in shaded corners. A woman strains curds through cloth. A child watches, fascinated, possibly hoping for a taste and definitely pretending not to. The curds are gathered, pressed, perhaps salted, and kept in jars. In a land where the sun can turn fresh milk from gift to problem with alarming speed, fermentation becomes wisdom. The texture is dense, slightly dry, and sharp on the tongue. You smell sour milk, clay dust, and the faint sweetness of straw. There is a quirky little tidbit tucked into Egyptian cheese history that feels almost too theatrical. One famous ancient cheese sample was associated with the tomb of Tams, a high-ranking official from the 13th century BCE. It had rested for thousands of years, which is, by any reasonable dinner party standard, too long. Nobody sensible looks at such a discovery and says, finally, a snack. Yet its survival reminds you that cheese can become an archaeological messenger. It tells of animals, microbes, vessels, trade in salt, and the daily skill of people whose names may never be carved in royal stone. Historians still debate how closely ancient Egyptian cheeses resembled modern fresh-brined cheeses, and whether some finds represent intentional cheese, strained fermented milk, or related dairy preparations. The categories are not always neat. Archaeology often hands scholars a residue, a vessel, a painting, or a crumb of preserved matter and politely says, good luck. Still, the broad picture is clear enough. Dairy mattered. Milk was transformed. Cheese belonged to the food life of the Nile world. You move onward across the sea into Greece, where hills rise dry and silver green with olive trees. Goats climb slopes with the calm arrogance of creatures who know humans cannot follow gracefully. Sheep bells clink. The air smells of thyme, dust, sea salt, and smoke from a small hearth. Here, cheese slips into myth, poetry, and household economy. In Homeric tradition, the Cyclops Polyphemus is not merely a one-eyed giant with poor hosting skills. He is also a shepherd who makes cheese in his cave. A strange detail, yes, but a revealing one. Even monsters, apparently, have dairy routines. You stand inside a cool cave where baskets of curd drain in the shadows. The floor is uneven under your sandals. The air is damp, animal warm, and thick with the smell of sheep's milk. You hear the distant bleating of flocks outside. Greek cheese is deeply tied to small livestock. Sheep and goats thrive where cattle may struggle, and their milk gives rich, distinctive curds. A simple cheese can become part of bread, olives, figs, wine, and roasted foods. It feeds shepherds, farmers, travellers, and households that know exactly how much work sits behind every bite. The Greeks also carried cheese into medicine and athletics. Ancient writers discussed diet, strength, digestion, and bodily balance with the confidence of people who had many theories and very few controlled clinical trials. Athletes sometimes ate cheese as part of training diets, and certain writers mention cheese in discussions of nourishment. You can picture a competitor preparing for a festival. Eating dense food meant to build strength, while nearby someone insists that their cousin knows the perfect diet. Humanity has always had nutrition advice. It just used to arrive with more sandals. Then Rome rises, loud and hungry. You walk along a road built with such stubborn skill that later centuries will still be slightly annoyed by it. Carts creak, soldiers march, vendors shout over one another. The smell is olive oil, sweat, leather, smoke, fish sauce, and hot bread. Cheese fits beautifully into Roman life because Romans love systems. They classify, transport, preserve, improve, and discuss. Roman writers describe cheese-making techniques, including curdling milk, pressing curds, salting, smoking, and aging. The Roman world helped spread dairy practices across provinces, carrying habits through military camps, villas, markets, and roads. You enter a Roman kitchen in a country villa. The floor is cool beneath your feet. A slave or servant works near a vessel of milk, adding a coagulant, cutting curd, draining it in baskets, and pressing it beneath weights. Smoke curls from a nearby hearth, brushing the cheese with flavour and preservation. The taste is salty, faintly smoky, more assertive than the fresh curds of warmer settlements. Some cheeses are eaten quickly, others are made to travel. Soldiers need portable food, farmers need storage, city dwellers need supply. Cheese answers all of them without asking to be praised too loudly. There is something deeply social about a Roman cheese stall. You stop among buyers choosing different kinds, some soft, some aged, some local, some transported from farther away. Prices shift with quality and origin. A wealthy household might enjoy refined varieties, while a worker may take a simpler portion with bread. Cheese crosses class lines, though not equally. It can be humble or desirable, ordinary or special. That is part of its quiet power. It does not belong to one table only. In Roman literature, cheese can even become a subject of rural pride. It appears in farming manuals, recipes, and poems. The countryside is imagined through milk, flocks, shade, and simple meals. Of course, elite writers praising rustic simplicity often do so from a very comfortable position. There is gentle sarcasm available here, because nothing says simple country virtue like a wealthy author admiring peasants from a safe literary distance. Still, their attention preserves details. Through them, you glimpse the labour behind the pastoral dream. You walk at dusk through a Roman camp. A cooking fire burns low. Men tear bread, slice cheese, and drink watered wine. Armour rests nearby. Leather smells sharp in the cooling air. Somewhere a mule stamps. The cheese is hard enough to carry, salty enough to wake the mouth, and filling enough to make the next day possible. This is conquest at the level of the stomach. Empires move on roads, orders, weapons, taxes, and logistics. Yes, but they also move on preserved food. A soldier cannot march on glory alone. Glory is notoriously low in calories. By the time night settles, cheese has become many things at once. In Mesopotamia, it is counted and distributed. In Egypt, it is preserved by heat, ritual, and burial. In Greece, it belongs to shepherds, myth, and diet. In Rome, it becomes technique, commerce, and travel food. You feel the ancient world not as a map of empires, but as a chain of meals, clay tablets, tomb jars, cave baskets, and Roman presses all speak in their quiet way. Milk has become curd has become culture, and culture has begun to carry flavour from one people to another. The city lamps flicker, a market closes. The last buyers go home with bread under one arm and cheese wrapped carefully for morning. The streets soften into shadow. You breathe in smoke, dust, brine, and warm animal scent. Cheese is still simple, but no longer small. It has entered temples, tombs, poems, kitchens, barracks, and trade routes. It rests in the hands of priests, shepherds, servants, soldiers, mothers, merchants, and hungry children waiting near the hearth. And as the ancient night deepens, you sense that this food has learned a powerful trick. It can become local everywhere. You enter a colder world of stone walls, damp paths, and patient hands. The morning is pale, and mist hangs low over a valley where cattle breathe steam into the air. Bells ring from a monastery tower, slow and hollow, rolling across fields that glitter with dew. You feel the chill through your sleeves as you walk along a muddy track, your boots pressing into soft earth. The smell is wood smoke, wet wool, crushed grass, and milk carried in pails that knock gently against one another. This is medieval Europe, and cheese is becoming a landscape you can taste. In the countryside, milk still changes quickly if left alone, but the people here have learned to guide that change with care. A pail is brought into a dairy room where the air is cooler than outside. The stone floor holds the night's cold. A wooden table has been scrubbed smooth by years of use. Cloths hang from pegs. A vat waits in the dim light. You hear the splash of milk poured in, the scrape of a ladle, the murmur of someone reciting a prayer under their breath, not necessarily because cheese needs prayer, but because medieval life tends to involve prayer in almost everything. Even the goats probably feel supervised. A mainstream historical fact settles into this scene. Monasteries played a major role in preserving and refining cheese-making traditions during the Middle Ages. Monastic communities owned land, managed herds, recorded practices, organised labour, and had the patience to repeat a process until it became reliable. That patience matters. Cheese rewards attention. It does not care about your schedule. It thickens when it thickens, drains when it drains, ages when it ages, and if you rush it, it will remind you who is really in charge. You follow a monk into the dairy. His robe brushes against the stone floor. His hands are clean, reddened by cold water. Milk is warmed carefully, not boiled into ruin. Rennet is added. The liquid rests. Nothing dramatic appears to happen, which is usually how the most important transformations begin. The surface firms. Curds gather. A long knife cuts through the mass, making soft lines that slowly release whey. The sound is quiet, almost sleepy. A wet whisper as the curds separate and settle. Here, cheese belongs to rhythm. Prayers mark the hours. Bells divide the day. Work fills the spaces between. Cows must be milked. Sheep must be guarded. Curds must be stirred, pressed, salted, turned. The monastery is not just a spiritual house. It is a farm, workshop, school, pantry, and business, all wrapped in stone and discipline. You smell sour whey, beeswax candles, damp straw, and smoke from the kitchen hearth. The atmosphere is hushed but busy, like a place where everyone is trying to be holy while also making sure nothing moulds in the wrong direction. Some cheeses are made soft and eaten young. Others are pressed into firmer wheels, salted, and stored in cellars. You descend into one of those cellars now. The stairs are uneven beneath your hand, moisture beads on the wall. The air grows cooler, thick with the mineral scent of stone and the earthy perfume of aging rinds. Wheels sit on wooden shelves in shadow, each one quietly becoming itself. You touch a rind with the back of your fingers. It is dry in some places, tacky in others, rough as old leather. It feels alive, because in a very real sense, it is. Medieval cheese is deeply local, a valley, a hillside, a breed of animal, a type of grass, a habit of salting, a particular cave, a repeated mistake that turns out not to be a mistake at all. All of it shapes flavour. In mountain regions, people need cheeses that can survive long winters and travel down difficult paths. Large wheels make sense where summer milk must be preserved for snowbound months. In wetter lowlands, softer cheeses thrive. In sheep country, sharper and richer curds appear. The map of cheese is a map of climate, labour, and necessity. Historians still debate exactly how many famous medieval cheeses can truly claim unbroken descent from recipes known by modern names, because food legends enjoy dressing themselves in antique clothing. A village may proudly insist its cheese has been made the same way since a saint leaned on a fence and blessed a cow. Perhaps there is a core of truth. Perhaps there is marketing wearing a charming little hood. The uncertainty does not make the story weaker. It makes it more human. Traditions are often real, but they are not always tidy. You step outside the monastery and climb toward a hillside pasture. The air is brighter here, washed clean by wind. Sheep scatter across the slope like bits of cloud that have become suspiciously vocal. Their bells make a delicate, uneven music. A shepherd leans on a staff, cloak pulled close, in a leather bag or small wrapped bundle. He carries bread and cheese. The cheese is not fancy. It is firm, salty, and practical. When you bite it, it resists at first, then breaks into a nutty richness that fills the mouth. It tastes of grass, weather, and distance. Below, in a village, women work near doorways where light falls across packed floors. A child turns a small cheese in a basket. An old man complains that it was better last year, because every century has that person. Smoke curls from thatched roofs. Chickens scratch near a threshold. The smell of boiling pottage mingles with whey and dung and rain-soaked wood. Cheese is food for ordinary tables, but it is also rent, tithe, trade, and gift. A wheel might be owed to a landlord. A basket of fresh curds might be taken to market. A special cheese might appear at a feast day, sitting beside bread, ale, onions, and preserved meats. There is a quirky medieval tidbit waiting in the shadows of the cheese cave. Some communities believed certain caves, cellars, or even accidental moulds had almost magical temperaments. A place could be said to favour a cheese, as if the stones themselves had preferences. Honestly, after standing in a damp cave full of breathing rinds, you can understand the feeling. The walls drip, the shelves creak, the cheese changes while no one watches. If a cave produces a better flavour than the room next door, why not imagine it has a mood? Medieval people lived close to invisible forces. Microbes were not yet named, so mystery took the credit, and mystery had plenty of work to do. Blue moulds might appear in cracks. Washed rinds might develop strong aromas when rubbed with brine, ale, or wine. Natural cave air could encourage ripening that no one fully understood. You watch a cheesemaker turn a wheel with deliberate gentleness. His hands know the surface. He wipes it, salts it, checks it, returns it to its place. The smell is powerful, earthy, sharp, and oddly comforting. It is not perfume, unless you are a very committed dairy enthusiast. Yet beneath that pungency lies nourishment, care, and long practice. The medieval calendar shapes cheese as much as weather does. Lenten fasting rules alter diets. Some days restrict meat, though dairy rules vary by region and period. Monasteries, nobles, and common households must navigate religious expectations as well as hunger. Cheese can be permitted, forbidden, debated, substituted, or treasured, depending on local custom and church authority. It is food, but also moral territory. You can almost hear someone in a kitchen asking whether this particular curd counts as indulgence, while someone else quietly eats it before the argument grows too theological. Markets make the story louder. You walk into a town square where stalls crowd beneath timber-framed buildings. Vendors call out prices. A cartwheel splashes through a puddle. Geese protest from a pen. The air smells of hay, smoke, spilled ale, wool, and ripe cheese wrapped in cloth. Wheels are cut with knives. Fresh cheeses sit in baskets. Buyers press, sniff, haggle, and judge. Cheese travels from a village to town, from abbey to manor, from mountain pasture to lowland fare. It is portable wealth, edible and exchangeable. Unlike coins, it can be eaten in a moment of weakness, which is both its advantage and its danger. At a noble table, cheese may arrive near the end of a meal, served with fruit, nuts, or sweet wine. In a cottage, it may be the meal, eaten with coarse bread and onions. In an abbey, it may be rationed according to rule and season. In a shepherd's pouch, it is survival. You begin to see how one food can carry many meanings without changing its basic form. A wheel of cheese is humble in the dairy and impressive in the hall. It can be a tax payment, a feast dish, a traveller's ration, or a secret bite taken in a cellar by someone who absolutely knows better. Night falls over the monastery valley. The last bell sounds, low and steady. Cattle shift in their stalls. Rain begins softly on the roof, tapping the tiles and darkening the courtyard stones. In the cellar, the cheeses rest in rows, silent as sleeping animals. Their rinds breathe in the cool air. Their centres deepen. Salt moves inward. Moisture leaves. Flavour gathers slowly, like a story told by someone in no hurry at all. You stand there in the dimness, breathing stone, milk, wood, and time. Medieval hands have taken the old knowledge of curds and given it patience, place, and identity. Cheese is no longer only a way to save milk from spoiling. It is becoming a signature of valleys, abbeys, mountains, markets, and households. It belongs to bells and caves, to prayers and trade, to hunger and celebration. The world outside may be uncertain, cold, and frequently muddy. But here on the shelf, in the quiet, milk has learned to wait. You wake beneath a sky the colour of worn blue cloth, with the road already stirring around you. Hooves thud softly in dust, harness rings clatter. A camel exhales with the weary judgment of an animal that has seen every human plan and found most of them optimistic. The air smells of leather, wool, sweat, dried herbs, and something faintly sour wrapped in cloth inside a merchant's pack. You reach toward it and feel a firm little bundle, cool from the night, salted hard enough to survive the day. Cheese is travelling, not politely, not with stamped documents and tidy luggage, but in sacks, jars, barrels, baskets, and the folds of migrating life. It moves because people move. Herds move to pasture. Traders move toward profit. Soldiers move under orders. Sailors move with the wind. Families move because fields fail. Rulers quarrel. Taxes bite. Or hope glimmers somewhere beyond the next ridge. Food has to follow, and cheese is well suited to the task. It is milk made smaller, denser, and more patient. Fresh milk sloshes, spoils, and complains. A salted cheese keeps its opinions to itself. You walk with a caravan at the edge of a dry plain. The morning begins cold, but the sun sharpens quickly. Men and women adjust bundles, check water skins, and count animals by habit. Bells tied to pack beasts make uneven music, high and hollow against the enormous quiet. The road is not a road in the modern sense. It is a memory pressed into the land by feet, wheels, hooves, and need. At midday, when the heat rises like an invisible wall, the travellers stop in a patch of thin shade. Someone opens a cloth and breaks hard cheese into pieces with a small knife. It smells salty, animal-rich, and slightly sharp. You bite down, and the texture resists, then softens slowly with bread and water. Across Central Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, and the highlands of many regions, herding peoples have long transformed milk into durable forms. Some are dried into hard pellets, some are strained until thick, some are salted in brine. A mainstream historical fact rests here with quiet certainty. Nomadic and semi-nomadic cultures developed portable dairy foods because mobility required nourishment that could withstand heat, distance, and time. Among Turkic, Mongol, Tibetan, Arab, Berber, and other pastoral communities, preserved milk foods became part of survival on the move. They were not decorative. They were practical brilliance with a tangy smell. You hold a dried milk curd between your fingers. It is hard, pale, and rough, almost like a pebble that has decided to become edible. Your thumb rubs powder from its surface. It may be softened in tea, crumbled into soup, chewed slowly, or carried for days. The taste can be bracing, sour enough to wake the entire face. Not every traveller would call it luxurious, but luxury is not the point. The point is calories, protein, salt, and the comforting knowledge that tomorrow's meal is not entirely imaginary. A quirky tidbit travels with these dried cheeses in some steppe and mountain cultures. Hardened dairy pieces could become so tough that outsiders joke they were closer to building material than food. The joke is unfair, but not entirely mysterious. A piece of dried curd can challenge the jaw like a tiny pale stone with nutritional ambitions. Yet once dissolved in hot liquid, it becomes generous again, releasing sourness, fat, and memory into the cup. It is a food that asks for patience, which is slightly bold for something small enough to hide in a sleeve. You continue toward a port where the air changes. Dust gives way to salt. The wind carries gull cries, tar, fish, bilge water, wet rope, and the warm stink of crowded docks. Ships lean against their moorings, creaking like old men telling the same story to anyone trapped nearby. Barrels are rolled over planks. Amphorae are stacked. Sailors shout above the slap of water against hulls. Cheese enters the maritime world because ships are hungry places. A crew needs food that can be stored, rationed, and eaten when storms make cooking nearly impossible. You step aboard a trading vessel and duck beneath a beam polished by many hands. Below deck, the air is close and dim. Your shoulder brushes rough wood. You hear water knocking against the hull. The stored food smells of saltfish, oil, vinegar, grain, onions, and aged cheese wrapped or packed for travel. On long voyages, cheese is useful because it concentrates nourishment and pairs well with hard bread, olives, dried fruit, or salted meat. Some varieties keep better than others, and not every voyage ends with appetizing results. Maritime storage is a severe judge. Heat, damp, rats, and time are all auditioning to ruin dinner. Still, cheese travels by sea remarkably well when made firm, dry, salted, smoked, or sealed. Mediterranean traders carry regional cheeses between islands and ports. Coastal peoples learn each other's tastes in small exchanges that leave fewer records than wars, but far better flavours. A sailor from one shore tastes a cheese from another and decides whether it is excellent, strange, overpriced, or all three. Food culture spreads through such ordinary judgments. Empires claim glory, but dockworkers and cooks do much of the actual blending. You stand in a market near the water, where languages overlap like waves. A merchant from inland has wheels wrapped in cloth. A fisherman buys a wedge. A woman selling flatbread recommends a sharper kind, because she knows what goes with what and has no time for nonsense. Spices scent the air. Brine leaks from a jar. A boy carries a basket of fresh cheese through the crowd, shouting until his voice cracks. Here, cheese becomes trade good, street food, ship provision, and souvenir. It crosses borders without asking whether anyone has agreed on the border. Scholars remain uncertain about many specific routes by which named cheeses spread. Because merchants did not always pause to write down the emotional biography of a wheel of curd, some movements are clear through records, recipes, taxation, and port accounts. Others must be inferred from language, technique, animal breeds, tools, and local tradition. Did a method arrive with migrants, with monks, with soldiers, with traders, or with a bride bringing household knowledge into a new village? Often, the honest answer is yes. Probably several of those, because history rarely chooses one tidy lane when 5 muddy ones are available. You leave the coast and enter mountain country. The path narrows, air grows thin and cold, pine resin scents the wind. Cowbells echo from slopes so steep they seem designed by someone with a grudge against knees. Herds climb to summer pasture, and people follow them into seasonal huts where milk is abundant for a few shining months. This movement, called transhumance in many regions, shapes cheese profoundly. Animals graze high meadows full of flowers, herbs, and grasses. Milk changes with the pasture. Cheese made there carries the mountain in its fat, Inside a wooden hut, smoke stains the rafters. A copper cauldron hangs over the fire, warm to the touch at its rim. Milk steams gently. You hear the crackle of burning wood, the low voices of workers, the distant bells of animals outside. Curds are cut, stirred, heated, pressed into great wheels. These wheels are not cute little table cheeses. They are serious provisions, made large because large cheeses age more slowly and can feed families through snowbound seasons. When carried down into valleys, they become trade goods with the smell of alpine grass and smoke locked inside. You help turn a wheel with both hands. It is heavy, damp, and faintly elastic under the rind. Your palms pick up salt and milk fat. The work is physical, repetitive, and exacting. Cheese travels from pasture to cellar, from cellar to market, from market to road, and from road to places where no cow has ever stood. Every stage changes its meaning. On the mountain, it is stored summer. In town, it is income. On a merchant's cart, it is inventory. On a table far away, it is a taste of a landscape the eater may never see. Migration carries softer cargo to habits, tastes, and memory. A family crossing a frontier may bring no great wealth, but someone knows how to sour milk a certain way, how to stretch curd in hot water, how to store cheese in brine, how to smoke it above a hearth, how to bury it in leaves, how to serve it at a wedding, how to judge if it is ready by pressing a thumb into the side. These skills travel in the body. They survive because someone teaches a child while standing beside a pot. The child complains, naturally, because being instructed is an ancient burden. Then one day the child repeats the method and calls it tradition. Cheese also moves through conquest and settlement. Armies carry rations. Colonists bring livestock. Traders introduce new markets. Religious communities carry fasting rules and food preferences. Refugees carry memory. Sometimes a cheese keeps its old identity in a new place. Sometimes it adapts to different milk, climate, salt, or tools. A goat cheese in one homeland becomes a cow cheese somewhere else. A fresh cheese becomes brined because the weather demands it. A smoked cheese appears because a hearth is the safest place to store it away from pests. Culture bends, and cheese bends with it. As dusk gathers over the road, the caravan makes camp. The animals kneel and snort. Fires are lit from coals protected all day. The sky turns violet at the edges. Someone warms flatbread on a stone. Someone crumbles cheese into a pot with grain and herbs. Steam rises, carrying the smell of salt, sour milk, smoke, and comfort. You cup the bowl in both hands, feeling heat seep into your fingers, around your accents, stories, sore feet, and the tired peace of travellers who have survived another day of dust and distance. Cheese has become a companion of motion. It is not only local now, it is portable place. It allows a shepherd to carry pasture into the desert, a sailor to carry land across the sea, a migrant to carry home into uncertainty, and a merchant to carry flavour into profit. It moves quietly beside louder histories of trade and empire, but it is always there, wrapped in cloth, sealed in jars, packed in brine, tucked into saddlebags, waiting for hunger. The fire lowers. Bells fall silent. The road disappears into darkness. But the food remains in your hands, dense and sustaining. You taste salt, milk, labour, weather, and travel. The world is wide, but the bundle is small. And in that smallness lies its genius. A piece of cheese can cross a desert, survive a voyage, climb a mountain, enter a market, and still arrive as something recognisably human. You step into a hall where candles tremble in tall iron stands and every surface seems to glow with the soft arrogance of wealth. Tapestries hold back the cold, rushes lie scattered beneath your feet, crushed with herbs that release a faint green scent when servants hurry across them. Somewhere a lute is being tuned with great seriousness and limited success. The air is crowded with roasting meat, spiced wine, beeswax, damp wool, perfume, and the unmistakable deeper smell of cheese waiting near the edge of the feast. You stand among people dressed in velvet, fur, linen, and ambition. Platters move through the room, knives flash, cups rise, laughter rolls beneath the beams. Here, cheese is not merely a farmer's necessity. It has learned court manners. It appears with fruit, nuts, preserves, white bread, wafers, and sweet wines. It may arrive near the end of a meal to settle the stomach, sharpen the appetite, or simply remind everyone that the household can afford variety. A servant sets down a board with several cheeses, some pale and soft, some firmer and golden, one strong enough to announce itself before anyone has invited it into conversation. A mainstream historical fact sits clearly on this table throughout medieval and early modern Europe. Cheese crossed class boundaries, appearing both in elite dining and in the everyday diets of rural and urban workers. The difference lay in kind, quantity, presentation, and access. Nobles might enjoy selected regional cheeses, imported specialties, or fresh dairy served elegantly. Poorer people might rely on a simpler cheese eaten with coarse bread, ale, onions, or pottage. One food, many meanings, very democratic, except for the part where almost nothing else is democratic. You take a small piece from a silver dish. It is creamy, faintly acidic, and softened by warmth from the hall. The texture gives way easily against your tongue. A slice of pear follows, sweet and grainy. Around you, the wealthy talk of marriages, land, horses, weather, and other people's failures, which remain timeless dinner subjects. Cheese here is part of display. It tells guests that animals are healthy, dairies are orderly, cellars are full, and supply lines are working. It says quietly but firmly that this household does not fear hunger tonight. Now you leave the polished hall and enter the service spaces, where the true machinery of comfort is breathing hard. The floor is slick in places. Heat from the kitchen presses against your face. Pots bubble. Dogs lurk hopefully near doorways. A girl carries a stack of trenchers. A cook snaps instructions over the hiss of fat and the slap of dough. You smell smoke, sour ale, sweat, onions, and warm milk. Cheese may appear in the hall as refinement, but back here it is labour. Someone milked the animals in cold dawn. Someone strained curds until wrists ached. Someone salted, turned, wrapped, counted, stored, and guarded it from mice, mould, theft, and teenagers, not necessarily in that order. The dairy room is cooler. Your hand touches a stone ledge polished by years of use. Cloth hangs damp over a basin. A shallow tub holds fresh curds, soft and shining. The work is often associated with women in many rural households, though men, servants, monks, hired dairy workers, and specialists all play roles depending on place and period. Skill is not decorative here. A good dairy woman understands temperature, texture, timing, cleanliness, and markets. She knows when cream should be skimmed, when curd should be cut, when a cheese needs more pressure, and when a batch has gone from interesting to regrettable. Historians still argue about how visible women's cheesemaking labour is in surviving records, because many accounts list products, rents, and sales, while leaving the skilled hands behind them unnamed. Household books may tell you how many cheeses were made or delivered, but not always who stayed awake worrying over the VAT. Legal records might notice a dairy worker only when something goes wrong. That silence is not absence. It is the familiar historical problem of ordinary work being essential and under-recorded, which is very convenient for the people eating it. You walk out into a village morning where the feast hall feels like another planet. Frost clings to fence rails. Smoke rises from low cottages. A rooster screams into the dawn with absolutely no regard for emotional well-being. Inside a small home, the air is close and dim. A fire burns low. Children sit near the hearth. hair sleep-tangled, feet tucked beneath them for warmth. A woman cuts bread with a worn knife and breaks a hard cheese into portions. The rind is rough under your thumb, the interior pale and crumbly. It smells sharp, salty, and honest. This cheese is not decoration. It is breakfast, supper, wages, preservation, and insurance against empty days. In many working households, meals centre on grains and pulses, with dairy adding precious fat and protein when available. Cheese can make poor bread easier to swallow and thin soup more sustaining. It travels to fields wrapped in cloth. It sits beside ale at midday. It fills a labourer's stomach without needing a fire. You taste it with dark bread, and the combination is plain but deeply satisfying. The chew is slow. The salt wakes the mouth. The body understands. In a cottage, cheese also measures the fragile success of household economy. How many animals can be kept? Who owns the pasture? Is there common grazing? Has disease thinned the herd? Did the summer produce enough milk? Is salt affordable? Can the family spare milk for cheese rather than drinking it fresh or feeding children immediately? Every wedge carries a season of decisions. It looks simple because survival often does. Once it reaches the plate, you follow a peasant to market with small cheeses packed in straw. The road is wet, and mud pulls at your shoes. The basket strap bites into your palm. At the town gate, voices rise in a rough music of bargaining and complaint. Bells from a nearby church mix with the clatter of carts. The market smells of cabbage, horse sweat, wool, fish, damp wood, and sharp dairy. Some cheeses are weighed, others are judged by sight, smell, and reputation. A buyer presses one with a thumb, sniffs it, and makes a face designed to reduce the price. This, too, is civilization. A quirky detail appears in market culture. Some towns and fairs became famous for particular cheeses, and reputation could attach itself so strongly to a place that the name became a promise, or at least a sales pitch. Buyers learned to distrust imitations, while sellers learned to insist their goods were authentic with the ancient confidence of merchants everywhere. You can imagine a stallholder declaring, with wounded dignity, that of course this wheel is from the proper valley, the proper herd, and the proper tradition. Meanwhile, the cheese sits silently, refusing to testify. Cheese could also become payment, wheels, fresh curds, butter, and other dairy goods might be owed as rent, tax, tithe, or obligation. In manorial economies, food moved upward from tenants to landlords, from village labour into elite storage. A cheese on a noble table may carry the invisible story of a household that would have enjoyed keeping it. You feel that tension in the hall and in the cottage alike. Cheese feeds across society, but it does not erase inequality. It reveals it. Who makes it? Who sells it? Who eats the finest part? Who eats the cracked edge? The answers are rarely accidental. At a manor dairy, the scale is larger. Cows are driven in from pasture, hooves sucking at wet ground. Milk arrives in pails, and the room fills with a clean, warm animal smell. Workers move with practiced speed. Curds are gathered into moulds lined with cloth. Presses creak as weights squeeze out whey. You hear drips falling into a trough, steady as a slow clock. Salt is rubbed across surfaces. Cheeses are marked, counted, and carried to storage. Your fingers brush a row of rinds, each one firming day by day. They are food, but also accounting. At court, cheese may be transformed into artful dishes. Fresh cheese can be sweetened, scented with rosewater, folded into pastries, or served in delicate forms. Some banquets include subtle surprises, decorative foods shaped to entertain. Food is theatre when power can pay for props. A soft cheese dish might arrive looking innocent and then reveal spices, fruit, or cream. The wealthy adore novelty, especially when someone else has done the washing up. Yet the humble wedge remains stubbornly central. Workers in fields pause beneath a hedge. A mason on a church site eats bread and cheese with hands dusty from stone. A shepherd shares a piece with a child who has carried water uphill and would like public recognition for this heroic act. A washerwoman eats quickly, standing. A clerk buys a small portion near the market because copying documents apparently builds a surprising appetite. Across these scenes, cheese is portable strength. You begin to notice how deeply it participates in social trust. A household known for good cheese gains reputation. A bad batch can embarrass a maker. A dishonest seller can lose customers. A landlord might demand regular delivery. A servant might be accused of skimming cream. A feast might be judged by abundance. Food builds relationships, and cheese, because it keeps and travels, becomes part of obligation and memory. It is given to neighbours, sent as a gift, served to guests, packed for journeys, sold in markets, and hidden from children with limited success. Even texture becomes social. Soft fresh cheeses suggest immediacy, access to recent milk, perhaps proximity to animals or a well-managed dairy. Hard-aged cheeses suggest storage, planning, distance, and sometimes wealth. A large wheel requires enough surplus milk to make it, enough salt to preserve it, enough space to keep it, and enough security that no one desperate eats it too soon. Patience is easier when the pantry is not empty. That may be the quietest luxury of all. Evening settles over the village and the great house alike. In the hall, candles burn lower as guests lean back, heavy with food and conversation. In the cottage, the last crumbs are brushed from a wooden board. Outside, animals shift in dark stalls, breathing warmth into the cold. The same moon silvering the manor roof touches the thatch and the market stones. Cheese rests in cellars, baskets, cupboards, and bellies. It has fed pride and labour, status and survival, ceremony and hunger. You hold the final bite in your hand. Its surface is dry, its centre dense and slightly salty. It is not grand, yet it contains the whole arrangement of a society pasture: property, skill, gender, trade, obligation, appetite, and comfort. Cheese sits quietly on the table, but it speaks fluent class. It tells you who has land, who has animals, who has time, who has storage, who has servants, who has only bread and the hope that bread will be enough. Then you taste it, and for one soft moment, all that complexity becomes warmth in the mouth. Simple as supper, deep as history. You step into a dairy room where the air is cool enough to make your breath slow, and every shelf seems to be quietly alive. The walls are stone, the floor is damp. A thin draught slips beneath the wooden door and moves across your ankles like a curious cat. Somewhere in the room, a drop of water falls from the ceiling into a shallow bowl with a tiny, patient sound. Plink, then silence, then plink again, as if time itself has decided to become very committed to minimal percussion. The smell reaches you first. It is not one smell, really, but a crowd. Fresh cream, wet rind, old wood, salt, mushrooms, cellar earth, sour milk, and something barnyard adjacent that politely refuses to leave. You might call it strange. You might call it beautiful. You might also call it a warning. Depending on how brave you feel at midnight, cheese has moved beyond simple preservation and into the realm of controlled transformation, although the word controlled is doing heroic work here. You stand beside a table where curds are being handled with almost ceremonial care. They are warm at first, soft and springy under your fingers, like a cloud that has been asked to take responsibility. Whey glistens on the surface. A cheesemaker cuts, stirs, drains, and waits. The room is quiet except for the wet hush of curd shifting in the vat, the scrape of a wooden paddle, and the occasional cough from someone who has spent too long in a cellar full of ambitious aromas. A mainstream historical fact becomes clear in this room. The ripening of many cheeses depends on bacteria, yeasts, and molds that alter texture, flavour, aroma, and appearance. For centuries, people did not know the modern scientific names for these organisms, but they learned their habits through observation. They knew which room encouraged a good rind. They knew which cloth carried a reliable surface bloom. They knew that one shelf made a cheese gentle, while another shelf turned it into something that could startle a guest from across the table. You walk toward a row of soft cheeses resting on straw mats. Their surfaces are white and downy, a delicate bloom spreading over them like winter mist. When you lean closer, the smell is creamy, mushroomy, and faintly sweet. Your fingertip hovers above the rind. It looks fragile, but it is busy. The soft white coat breaks down proteins and fats near the surface, turning the outside tender and the inside gradually silkier. A knife slips through one small round, and the centre gives way in a slow, pale sigh. It is rich, smooth, and almost indecently calm. These bloomy cheeses ask you to reconsider decay. That's the funny thing. What looks like spoilage in one context becomes ripening in another. The difference is not always obvious to a beginner, which is why beginners sniff things nervously and ask questions in a tone usually reserved for suspicious mushrooms. The cheesemaker knows better. The rind is not an accident. It is a living blanket, a soft collaboration between milk, salt, moisture, and invisible workers. Across the room, blue cheese waits in a darker corner. It has no interest in being subtle. When a wheel is split open, veins of blue-green mould lace through the creamy body like storm lines on an old map. The smell is sharper, mineral, peppery, and deep. You feel the cool paste crumble under your thumb. It stains slightly, leaving a ghost of colour on your skin. The taste arrives in waves, salt first, then cream, then a bold, earthy bite that seems to echo in the nose. The formation of blue veins often depends on oxygen reaching the interior of the cheese. Needles or natural cracks allow air to enter, encouraging mould to grow through the body rather than only on the surface. The practice feels almost mischievous. You pierce a cheese so it can breathe, and in return it develops a flavour strong enough to divide families at dinner. Some people fall in love immediately, others make the face of a betrayed monarch. Both reactions are part of the tradition. A quirky tidbit rises from the folklore around blue cheese legends, often claim that famous blue varieties began when someone abandoned bread and cheese in a cave, then returned to find mould had done something surprisingly delicious. It is a charming story, deeply useful for tours, labels, and people who enjoy romantic accidents. Is it literally true in any specific case? Perhaps. Perhaps not. Still, it captures a real possibility. Mouldy bread, damp caves, sheep's milk, forgetfulness, hunger, and courage could absolutely conspire to create a new food. Many inventions begin when someone should probably have cleaned up sooner. Historians still argue whether some celebrated mould-ripened cheeses began as accidental discoveries later refined into technique, or whether local makers were already guiding these processes with more intention than the legends admit. The uncertainty is delicious in its own way. Folklore loves the dramatic abandoned lunch. Scholarship tends to ask dull but necessary questions about trade, tools, climate, and written records. The truth may sit somewhere between them, wearing a blue vein and looking pleased with itself. You move to another shelf, where washed rind cheeses glow orange, rose, and amber in the low light. They look cheerful. They smell dangerous. A maker dips a cloth into brine and rubs the surface of a small wheel with steady, practiced strokes. Sometimes the wash is simple salt water. Sometimes it may involve beer, wine, cider, or spirits, depending on region and habit. The rind becomes sticky under the hand. The scent grows meaty, savoury, and strong, drifting into the room with absolutely no humility. These cheeses are the extroverts of the cellar. Their bacteria thrive on the moist, salty surface, building colours and aromas that can seem alarming until you taste the interior. Inside, The paste may be soft, mild, and buttery, as if the cheese is wearing a dramatic costume for attention. You press one gently, it yields beneath your finger, warm from handling but cool at its centre. The rind clings slightly, tacky as damp leather. It smells of hay, broth, cellar, and old wood, not perfume, not exactly. More like a very confident memory of a barn that has read philosophy. You notice how much this world depends on touch. A cheese is not judged by sight alone. It is lifted, pressed, tapped, smelled, turned. The maker listens to it in a way that is almost tender. Does the rind crackle? Does the wheel sound hollow or dense? Is the surface too dry, too wet, too eager? A soft cheese may need gentler air. A hard wheel may need turning. A washed rind may need another brushing. The whole room is an ongoing conversation, although most of the participants are microscopic and rude enough not to answer directly. The atmosphere deepens as evening falls. Candlelight glows against damp stone. Shadows gather between shelves. The cheeses seem almost like sleeping creatures, each with its own slow dream. You hear the creak of wood as a shelf settles, the whisper of cloth being wrung out, the muted thump of a wheel placed back in line. The air is cool on your cheeks, heavy in the lungs, full of ripening life. Nothing hurries here. Microbes have no respect for human impatience, which may be one of their finer qualities. For most of history, makers worked without microscopes. They did not see bacteria dividing or enzymes changing proteins. They did not speak of microbial ecology. They spoke instead of good milk, clean cloth, proper salt, faithful cellars, right weather, and the behaviour of a batch. Their science lived in repeated action. When something succeeded, they remembered. When something failed, they remembered harder. Knowledge passed through hands, noses, and family scolding. A child might learn that a certain shelf was lucky. Later, a scientist might say it had a stable microbial community. Both descriptions point toward the same quiet truth, though one sounds better beside a fire. You taste a crumb of aged cheese from a wheel with crystals hidden inside. It breaks under your teeth with tiny, pleasant sparks. Those crystals are not grit from careless handling, but the result of changes inside the cheese as it matures. The flavour is nutty, savoury, deep, and lingering. It seems impossible that it began as milk, a liquid so gentle and temporary. Age has concentrated it. Microbes have translated it. Salt has steadied it. Time has done the rest, slowly, without applause. There is a lesson here, soft enough for bedtime but sturdy enough for history. Humans did not conquer microbes by force. They learned to host them. They made rooms where helpful organisms could thrive and harmful ones could be discouraged. They salted, dried, heated, cooled, washed, pierced, wrapped, and waited. Cheese became one of humanity's oldest partnerships with the invisible world. Not a perfect partnership, of course. Sometimes the invisible world wins in unpleasant ways, but often, wonderfully often, it gives back something fragrant, nourishing, and strange. You stand in the cellar as the candle burns lower. The stone holds the day's chill. Your fingertips smell faintly of rind and salt. The silence is not empty. It is full of tiny labour, of slow change, of milk becoming texture and aroma. The cheeses sleep on their shelves, but inside them, life continues in hidden motion. You breathe carefully, almost reverently, and feel the calm oddness of it all, a food that ripens because it is alive, a flavour born from patience, a comfort made from mystery. You step into a morning thick with fog and salt, where ships rise from the harbour like dark wooden cliffs. The docks groan under barrels, crates, ropes, and men shouting for gulls that behave as if they personally own the sky. Water slaps against hulls. Chains rattle. Somewhere, A cow lowing in a pen sounds deeply offended by maritime trade. The air smells of tar, fish, damp wood, smoke, sweat, and hard cheese packed for a voyage across an ocean that has never promised kindness. Cheese has entered the age of empires. It travels now with soldiers, settlers, missionaries, merchants, enslaved people, sailors, and officials who carry paperwork with the same confidence other people carry lunch. The world is being connected by force, trade, hunger, greed, hope, and survival. Cheese moves through these networks not as a grand hero, but as a durable companion. It sits in ship stores. It feeds workers in ports. It appears on colonial tables beside salted meat, hard bread, beans, rum, tea, fruit preserves, and all the complicated appetites of empire. You walk along a wharf where a cooper tightens iron hoops around a barrel. Each hammer strike rings through the damp air. Inside other barrels, cheese waits in heavy wheels or packed forms, salted enough to resist spoilage. Sailors need foods that can endure long weeks at sea. Settlers need familiar nourishment in unfamiliar lands. Traders need goods that can be measured, stored, shipped, and sold. A mainstream historical fact rests firmly in this harbour. European colonial expansion helped spread cattle, dairy practices, and cheese-making traditions into the Americas, Southern Africa, Australia, and other regions reshaped by settlement and trade. You touch the side of a cheese wheel wrapped in cloth. The surface is firm, slightly greasy, and cool from the morning mist. It carries the smell of cellar and salt. On a ship, that firmness matters. Fresh milk is nearly useless for long ocean travel unless animals are brought aboard, which is both difficult and, frankly, rude to everyone involved, especially the animals. Cheese concentrates milk into something more obedient. It can be stacked, rationed, sliced, traded, or eaten quickly when weather turns the galley into a comedy of sliding objects. The ship creaks beneath your feet as you descend into the hold. Light narrows. The air grows close, heavy with bilge water, rope fibre, salted fish, onions, and aging dairy. Barrels shift with the swell. You steady yourself against rough timber, feeling the grain catch your palm. In the dimness, food becomes strategy. Every stored item must justify its space. Cheese does so easily. It is fat, protein, salt, and memory, packed into a form that can survive motion. But empire is never just movement. It is also disruption. You step from the ship into a colonial settlement where forests have been cut back, fences raised, and unfamiliar grasses tested beneath imported hooves. Cattle brought by Europeans change landscapes and economies. In some places, they thrive. In others, they struggle against climate, disease, poor pasture, or local conditions that refuse to cooperate with imperial enthusiasm. The smell of the settlement is fresh cut timber, mud, manure, wood smoke, and milk souring in a warm room. People try to remake home with the animals, tools, and recipes they know. A settler woman bends over a vat, sleeves rolled, face tired in the heat. She's making cheese partly from memory, partly from necessity, partly from stubbornness. The milk is not quite like the milk she knew. The weather is different. The salt behaves differently in humid air. The cellar is too warm, or too dry, or too full of insects with strong opinions. Still, she works. Curds form. Whey drains. Cloth is tightened. A press creaks slowly under weight. The cheese may not taste exactly like its ancestor across the sea, but it becomes food for this place. Across colonial societies, cheese also marks identity. British settlers want cheddar-like firmness. Dutch communities preserve their own dairy habits. French settlers bring traditions of soft, fresh, and ripened cheeses where conditions allow. Spanish and Portuguese colonial worlds develop and adapt cheeses through cattle ranching, missions, estates, and local markets. Yet the results are never simple copies. Local grasses, animals, climates, indigenous knowledge, enslaved labour, and regional trade all shape what appears on the table. Cheese becomes a colonial food, but also a Creole food, a hybrid food, a food of adaptation. Scholars continue to debate how much credit should be given to imported European technique versus local innovation in many colonial cheeses, because surviving records often favour landowners, traders, and officials rather than the workers who actually handled the milk. A plantation account might list dairy output without naming the enslaved dairymaid who understood the herd better than anyone. A mission record might count cattle and cheese, while hiding the indigenous labour that made production possible. The archive has a habit of bowing to power. The cheese remembers more than the paperwork admits. You move inland to a ranching frontier, where open land stretches beneath a hard sky. Cattle graze in dusty light. Leather creaks. Spurs chime. A rope slides through calloused hands. The smell is sun-baked grass, animal hide, smoke, and milk heated in metal vessels. Here, cheese can be rough, fresh, salty, and practical, shaped by distance from towns and the need to use what the herd provides. In parts of the Americas, cheeses made from cow, goat, and sheep milk become daily foods, market goods, and regional signatures, blending Iberian, indigenous, African, and local frontier influences. A quirky tidbit rises from these worlds of movement and exchange. Some colonial and frontier cheeses were made in enormous sizes for display, politics, or celebration. The most famous giant cheeses in North American culture became public gifts, symbols of abundance, and slightly absurd edible monuments. Imagine the confidence required to make a cheese so large it becomes a political statement. Some people build statues. Dairy people, apparently, look at a vat and think, bigger. It is difficult not to admire the commitment. Then the air changes again. You hear machinery. The sound begins as a low thump, then grows into clanking, rattling, turning, pumping. You enter the 19th century, where cheesemaking begins to shift from household and farm dairies toward factory production in many regions. The room is bright, busy, and sharper in smell than the old stone cellars. Steam rises from vats, metal tools gleam, workers move in coordinated patterns. Milk arrives from multiple farms and is pooled, measured, heated, and transformed on a scale that would astonish a village dairy. The atmosphere is energetic, practical, and a little less romantic, which is usually what happens when efficiency walks in wearing boots. Industrial dairying changes cheese deeply. Standardization becomes the dream. Factories aim for predictable flavor, shape, safety, and yield. Measurements matter more. Thermometers, acid tests, controlled starters, and later laboratory science bring new precision. In the United States, factory cheese making expanded in the 19th century, especially in regions where dairy farming grew commercially. Similar changes unfolded elsewhere, tied to railroads, urban markets, refrigeration, and the rising power of food industries. Cheese is no longer only what one farm or valley makes. It becomes something cities can depend on. You watch milk poured from cans into a factory vat. The metal rim is cold beneath your hand. The liquid surface trembles, reflecting windows and beams above. Workers test acidity, add rennet, cut curd, stir with long tools, drain whey, mill curd, salt it, and press it into blocks or wheels. The smell is clean, lactic, warm, and faintly metallic. The sound is constant boots on wet floors, steam pipes hissing, cans clanging, curd knives scraping through thickening milk. Human senses still matter, but now they work beside instruments. This shift brings benefits. More people can buy cheese. Urban families gain access to dairy foods beyond the limits of their own animals or nearby farms. Trade expands. Some cheeses become national products instead of local rarities. But there is loss too. Factory production can flatten regional difference. Small makers may struggle. Seasonal variation, once accepted as part of flavour, becomes a problem to be corrected. The wild little personality of milk is gently, firmly told to behave. You step into a growing city where cheese arrives by rail. Steam engines breathe at the station, exhaling coal smoke and hot iron. Porters unload crates. Horses pull carts through streets slick with rain. Shop windows glow in the late afternoon. Inside a provision store, wedges and wheels sit behind glass or beneath cloth. Customers ask for reliable cheese, affordable cheese, cheese that will feed children, boarders, workers, and guests. Industrial food is not only about profit, it is also about feeding crowds that have moved away from farms into factories, offices, and rented rooms. Migration reshapes cheese again. Italians bring mozzarella, ricotta, pecorino habits, and stretched curd traditions to new cities. Jewish communities carry dairy dishes into urban markets and delicatessens. Germans, Swiss, Scandinavians, Greeks, Armenians, Lebanese, Mexicans, and many others carry cheeses, methods, tastes, and cravings across oceans and borders. Sometimes they make the cheeses they miss. Sometimes they substitute local milk. Sometimes they open shops. Sometimes they teach neighbours. A food that once marked homeland becomes part of a new street corner. You stand in an immigrant kitchen at dusk. A pot warms on the stove. A child hears two languages in the same room and smells milk, garlic, onions, yeast dough, and fresh cheese draining in cloth. The windows, fog. Outside, carts clatter over stones. Inside, someone shapes curd by hand, tugging it gently, testing elasticity, frowning because the milk is not quite right but good enough. The cheese tastes like compromise and devotion. It is not identical to the village memory, but it is alive. By the time the lamps glow across the city, cheese has become tied to empire, industry, migration, and memory. It has fed sailors in cramped holds, settlers in rough cabins, ranch workers under enormous skies, factory labourers beside steaming vats, and newcomers trying to rebuild home in rented rooms. It has been a ration, a commodity, a symbol, a business, and a comfort. You feel its surface under your fingers, firm and slightly cool, carrying the pressure of trade routes and machines. Night settles over harbour, ranch, factory, and city street. Somewhere a wheel ages in a warehouse. Somewhere a fresh cheese drains near a kitchen stove. Somewhere a train carries crates to order strangers who will slice, melt, grate, and eat without knowing the full distance travelled. Cheese has entered the great engines of the modern world, but it still begins with milk, salt, touch, and waiting. The empires may claim the maps, the factories may claim the numbers, yet the quiet hunger remains human. You step into a bright factory morning where the walls are tiled. The floors shine with water, and the air smells of warm milk, steam, metal, and something faintly buttery rising from enormous vats. The room hums instead of whispers. Motors turn, pipes knock. Conveyor belts murmur with a soft mechanical patience. Workers in white coats move through the light, carrying clipboards, checking gauges, and giving the milk a level of supervision that earlier centuries might have found either impressive or deeply rude. Cheese is learning to become modern. You stand beside a stainless steel vat broad enough to make an ancient herder stare in silence. Milk flows in through polished pipes, measured and cooled, heated and tested, guided by instruments that glow with numbers. The metal rim feels cold beneath your hand. Steam beads on your skin. A paddle turns slowly through the liquid, and the surface ripples like a pale indoor pond. The smell is cleaner than a cave cellar, less mysterious, more controlled. It is milk under management. A mainstream historical fact rises clearly here. Refrigeration transformed dairy by making milk and cheese safer to store, easier to transport, and more available in cities. Cold changed the food map. It slowed spoilage, widened markets, and helped supermarkets fill their cases with products that did not depend entirely on the weather outside. The refrigerator, that humming box in the kitchen, may not look romantic, but it quietly altered how millions of people ate. It made cheese less seasonal, less local, and far more ordinary in daily life. You walk into a chilled storage room, and the air grips your face at once. The smell is muted, creamy, faintly plastic, with the clean sharpness of cold air. Shelves hold blocks, loaves, slices, shreds, tubs, wedges, and wrapped portions. Everything has a label. Everything has a date. Everything seems to be waiting with corporate politeness. Your fingers brush a sealed package, smooth and slightly damp from condensation. Cheese is no longer only something made and judged by touch. It is something branded, sealed, barcoded, stacked, and chosen under fluorescent lights while someone nearby wonders whether they also need dish soap. The supermarket cheese aisle is its own little theatre. Doors sigh open and shut, carts squeak. A child points at bright orange slices. A tired parent reaches for the familiar pack without stopping. A student compares prices with the seriousness of a medieval tax collector. A shopper in a nice coat examines imported wedges, while another grabs shredded mozzarella because dinner needs to happen before everyone loses patience. The atmosphere is chilled, practical, and strangely intimate. Cheese has become part of the weekly routine, hidden among errands, budgets, cravings, and small negotiations. Processed cheese enters this world with cheerful confidence. It is not trying to be a cave-age treasure. It is trying to melt smoothly, store reliably, taste consistent, and fit into lunchboxes without drama. Processed cheese is made by blending cheese with emulsifying salts and other ingredients, creating a product that melts evenly and resists separation. This is the genius behind the perfect gooey sheet on a burger, the glossy ribbon in macaroni, and the square slice that peels from its wrapper with a tiny plastic sigh. You pick up one of those slices now. It bends softly over your fingers, cool and smooth, almost too perfect. Its colour is golden, sunny, and deeply unnatural in the way only a beloved convenience food can be. The wrapper clings, then releases. You hear the faint crackle of plastic. The slice lands on hot bread, softens almost immediately, and slowly relaxes into a shining blanket. There is no grandeur here, no mountain pasture, no holy cellar, no noble banquet. There is toast, heat, hunger, and the small satisfaction of food doing exactly what it promised. A quirky tidbit sits right in the middle of this modern story. Processed cheese became so tied to convenience and patriotism in some places that it was packed into military rations, school meals, relief programs, and government food supplies. Giant blocks of surplus cheese even became part of political memory in the United States, turning dairy policy into something people could literally carry home. Few foods can claim to be both sandwich filling and evidence of agricultural economics. Cheese, once again, refuses to stay in one category. You enter a mid-20th century kitchen where the wallpaper is bright, the counters are wiped clean, and a refrigerator hums like a sleeping appliance with secrets. Outside, a lawnmower drones in the distance. Inside, a mother, father, grandparent, or older sibling prepares lunch with efficient hands. Bread lies on a plate. A packet of slices opens. Tomato soup warms on the stove, sending up a sweet, acidic steam. Butter hisses in a pan. The sandwich meets heat. and the smell becomes instantly comforting toasted bread, melted cheese, salt, and browning fat. You press the sandwich with a spatula. The surface crackles lightly. The handle is warm in your palm. When the bread is cut, the cheese stretches between halves in a slow golden thread. It is not the oldest kind of cheese pleasure, but it is one of the most emotionally persuasive. Modern food is often accused of being shallow, and sometimes it deserves the lecture. Yet a grilled cheese sandwich on a cold day is not shallow. It is edible reassurance. It says, sit down, eat this. The world may continue being absurd, but at least this part is hot. Convenience cheese also changes childhood. Lunchboxes carry wrapped portions, cheese sticks, soft spreads, and little wedges sealed in foil. You hear the cafeteria roar, trays sliding, chairs scraping, milk cartons opening, children shouting with the wild energy of people who have been seated too long. A cheese slice on a sandwich becomes routine. A string cheese pulled into pale ribbons becomes entertainment, because children can turn almost anything into a performance. The touch is rubbery, cool, and playful. The taste is mild, salty, safe. Scholars still debate whether mass-produced cheese weakened traditional food culture or simply created a new layer of it. Because convenience can be both loss and invention. It can flatten flavour and disconnect eaters from craft. It can also feed busy families, stretch budgets, and create memories that are no less real because they came wrapped in plastic. The question is not simple. A handmade wheel and a processed slice do different work in human life. One asks for attention. The other asks to be useful at 11:47 p.m. When someone is standing in a kitchen wearing socks and regret, fast food turns cheese into a global signal. You walk into a burger shop where fryers hiss, timers beep, and the air smells of oil, salt, pickles, onions, and melted dairy. Workers move quickly beneath bright menu boards. A slice lands on a patty and softens under heat, clinging to the surface like a golden flag of convenience. The cheeseburger becomes an icon, carried across borders by chains, advertising, highways, shopping malls, airports, and teenagers with astonishing appetites. Cheese here is not subtle. It is visual. It tells the mouth what to expect before the first bite. Pizza does something even larger. In ovens hot enough to make the air shimmer, mozzarella bubbles, stretches, browns, and blisters. You hear dough slide onto stone, the scrape of a peel, the pop of sauce beneath melting cheese. The smell is yeast, tomato, oregano, garlic, and milk fat turning golden at the edges. A slice lifted from the pan creates long strands that refuse to break politely. This stretch becomes a modern ritual, photographed, advertised, exaggerated, loved. Cheese has become spectacle, and honestly, it performs well. At home, bags of shredded cheese wait in freezers and fridges. They tumble from plastic with a dry, soft rustle. Anti-caking powders keep the shreds separate, which is practical, though perhaps not poetic. Cooks scatter them over casseroles, tacos, baked potatoes, pasta, eggs, soups, and late-night inventions that do not need witnesses. The cheese melts into family meals shaped by work schedules, school nights, television dinners, microwave beeps, and the eternal question of what is easy. Yet the modern age does not only simplify cheese, it also creates choice fatigue, which is very advanced and not always helpful. You stand in a grocery aisle facing mild cheddar, sharp cheddar, extra sharp cheddar, white cheddar, smoked cheddar, cheddar with peppers, cheddar already cubed, cheddar already shredded, cheddar in a party tray, and cheddar shaped for children who apparently require geometry with lunch. Abundance can be delightful and faintly ridiculous. The same food that once depended on the luck of pasture now comes in 27 formats and asks you to decide while blocking someone else's cart. Food science keeps refining texture, shelf life, melt, flavour, packaging, and safety, Pasteurization, starter cultures, temperature control, vacuum sealing, modified atmosphere packaging, and industrial sanitation all help shape the cheese people buy. Some of this sounds sleepy in the wrong way, like a manual falling open on your chest. But it matters. These systems help keep cheese consistent and widely available. They also separate many eaters from the messy, fragrant, living processes behind it. The result is trust without intimacy. Still, intimacy returns whenever cheese melts. A square slice folding over a burger, a bubbling casserole at a family table, nachos shared in a cinema lobby, macaroni stirred in a pot, a cheese toast eaten over the sink while rain taps the window. These are not ancient rituals, but they are rituals. The sound of a wrapper opening can become memory. The smell of melted processed cheese can carry a person back to childhood more quickly than any museum label. Taste does not ask whether nostalgia is artisanal. Night settles around the modern kitchen. The refrigerator hums steadily. A small light glows when the door opens, illuminating packages, jars, leftovers, and a half-used block of cheese wrapped too casually to impress anyone. You close the door, and the room falls dim again. Somewhere, factories are still running, trucks are crossing highways, supermarkets are restocking, ovens are cooling, children are sleeping after cheese sandwiches, pizza slices, pasta bowls, and snacks packed for tomorrow. You hold a warm bite in your mouth and let it soften. The flavour is mild, salty, familiar. It does not ask to be admired like a rare treasure. It asks only to be there when needed. In the modern world, cheese becomes convenient, emotional, ordinary, and everywhere. It loses mystery, gains new meanings, and settles into the daily machinery of life with surprising tenderness. The square slice may not be ancient poetry, but under the right light, on the right bread, in the right tired hand, it is comfort shaped by an age that wanted food to wait for us. You stand in a village square just as morning spreads over tiled roofs, market awnings, and a church bell that rings with the calm authority of something older than everyone's alarm clock. The sound moves through the air in bronze waves. Pigeons startle from a roofline, then settle again with the offended dignity of tiny officials. Under a striped canopy, a cheesemonger unwraps a wheel from linen, and the smell rises at once salt, cream, cellar stone, cut grass, and a faint earthy sharpness that seems to belong not only to the cheese, but to the whole place. People drift toward the stall with baskets on their arms. They greet each other by name. A woman touches the rind with 2 fingers, then nods as if the cheese has answered a serious question. An older man leans close, sniffs, and makes a face that could mean approval, suspicion, or a lifetime of complicated standards. The seller cuts a wedge, and the knife moves through the paste with a soft, sticky sigh. You feel the air tighten around the moment. This is not simply breakfast shopping. This is identity. A mainstream historical fact rests clearly in this market. Many cheeses are strongly tied to specific regions, and in many countries, protected names and legal systems have been created to defend those regional identities. Names like Parmigiano Reggiano, Roquefort, Stilton, Manchego, Comté, Feta, and many others do not merely describe flavour. They point to geography, technique, milk, history, and the right to say, this belongs to us. Cheese becomes a passport stamped by pasture, cellar, law, and memory. You take a small piece on your tongue. It is firm at first, then it breaks into crystals, salt, sweetness, and a deep, savoury warmth. Someone beside you says that no cheese made elsewhere can truly taste the same. Maybe it is the grass, maybe the breed of animal, maybe the air in the aging room, maybe the wooden shelves that have held generations of wheels. Maybe, and this is not very scientific but deeply human, it is the pride of the person saying it. Pride has no measurable fat content, but it is remarkably present in food. You walk through the village lanes, and every detail seems to explain the cheese. The cows graze beyond stone walls. Rain has darkened the fields. Wild herbs grow near the path, crushed beneath your shoes with a bitter green scent. In a low building, milk is warming in a vat. You hear the scrape of tools, the splash of whey, the creak of a press. The cheesemaker's hands are strong and reddened, moving with the relaxed precision of someone who has done the same task so many times that the body remembers before the mind bothers to speak. Local cheese is often defended because it is local labour made visible. It carries the work of farmers who rise before dawn, milkers who know each animal's temper, makers who understand the mood of curd, affineurs who turn wheels in quiet rooms, shopkeepers who tell customers exactly which batch is ready, and families who serve it at weddings, funerals, holidays, and ordinary nights when everyone is too tired to cook properly. A cheese can be eaten in minutes, but it may contain months of weather and decades of inherited skill. Food historians continue to debate how much of a cheese's identity comes from measurable conditions, such as climate, microbes, animal feed, and technique, and how much comes from storytelling, lore, nostalgia, and marketing. The argument is not small. A region may insist that its cheese is unique because of its soil and air. A scientist may point to specific cultures, temperatures, and processes. A skeptical outsider may ask whether the romance has been gently inflated for tourism. Everyone may be partly right, which is annoying, but history often enjoys refusing a clean answer. You step into a cool, aging room where rows of wheels rest like sleeping moons. The atmosphere is dense and quiet. Moisture clings to the walls. The wooden shelves smell of salt, mushroom, and old milk. Your palm brushes are rind, rough and dry, with tiny patches of colour deepening in the low light. The caretaker turns each wheel carefully, not as a museum guard handles an artefact, but as a person handles something alive and valuable. This room is both workplace and archive. The cheeses store flavour, but they also store belonging. In one region, a cheese may be cut at a festival with music and speeches. In another, it may be rolled down a hill by people who, for reasons best known to tradition, have decided gravity needs a dairy component. In some villages, enormous wheels are blessed, judged, auctioned, paraded, or guarded with theatrical seriousness. A quirky tidbit belongs here: cheese rolling. Especially the famous English hill race involving a runaway wheel has become one of those customs that looks invented by a committee of mischievous ancestors. People chase the cheese escapes, dignity becomes optional, and everyone pretends this is perfectly normal because tradition has excellent public relations. Yet even silly rituals matter. They turn food into performance. They say, "We are the people who do this." A festival cheese is not only eaten, it is watched, applauded, argued over, photographed, remembered. Children see adults behaving with great seriousness around a wheel of curd and learn, without a lecture, that this food belongs to their place. They may leave the village later. They may move to a city, cross an ocean, change languages, forget the names of neighbours, but one smell can bring it back. A rind cracked open in a kitchen far away can rebuild a landscape in the mind. You sit at a family table where the room is warm, crowded, and softly chaotic. Plates are passed. A knife with a worn handle rests beside a board. Someone insists the cheese must be cut in a particular way. Someone else violates this rule and is corrected instantly, because family love often arrives disguised as cutlery advice. The smell of soup, bread, wine, onions, and cheese fills the air. A grandmother, uncle, aunt, father, mother, cousin, or neighbour tells you which maker is trustworthy, which supermarket version is an insult, and which cousin once bought the wrong kind and has apparently never recovered socially. Cheese identity can become fierce because it is intimate. Nations argue over names, villages argue over methods, families argue over texture. Is the proper cheese crumbly or elastic? Should it be made from raw milk or pasteurized milk? Should the rind be eaten? Should it smell that strong? Should it be grated, sliced, melted, fried, baked, or left alone because, really, must we interfere with everything? These questions sound small until you hear the emotion behind them. Food is never only food when it carries memory. You move across borders now, not by road, but by taste. In Greece, brined white cheese appears in salads, pies, and tables shaded from the sun. In Mexico, fresh cheeses crumble over beans, tortillas, soups, and grilled corn. In India, paneer holds its shape in simmering sauces, soft and mild against spices. In the Caucasus, cheeses stretch, melt, and fill breads that steam when torn open. In the Middle East, salty cheeses join olives, flatbread, herbs, and tea. In Scandinavia, brownway cheeses carry caramel sweetness and surprise visitors who expected something entirely different. Everywhere, cheese adapts to meals, climates, animals, and customs. You feel the difference in your hands. A fresh cheese is cool, moist, and delicate, leaving a milky trace on the fingers. A brined cheese is firm and squeaky, salt beading on its surface. A hard grating cheese breaks into sharp flakes. A stretched curd cheese pulls like warm silk. A smoked cheese carries the scent of firewood, dark and comforting. Each texture teaches a way of eating. Each way of eating teaches a way of living. Some cheeses belong to quick market lunches. Others demand ceremony. Some are humble enough for a child's snack. Others arrive in tiny portions with the emotional confidence of royalty. Legal protection adds another layer. It can help small producers defend their names against industrial imitation. It can preserve methods and support rural economies. It can also create disputes over who gets included, who is left out, and whether tradition should be fixed in official language when living food has always changed. A protected cheese may be a shield, but also a boundary. It tells producers what they must do to belong. That can honour history, or it can freeze one version of it in place while quieter variations fall away. You walk through a diaspora neighbourhood in a faraway city. The street smells of coffee, rain on pavement, fried dough, grilled meat, spices, and cheese warming inside pastries. Signs appear in more than one language. A small shop sells imported tins, local substitutes, and handmade versions adapted to the milk available nearby. The owner cuts a sample and watches your face carefully. The cheese is not exactly the one from the homeland, but it is not pretending to be careless. It is memory under new conditions. It has learned the accent of another city. For migrants, cheese can become a portable homeland. A mother teaches a child to fold curds into dough. A grandfather complains that the milk is different here, then eats 3 pieces. A restaurant serves a cheese dish to people who have never visited the country it comes from. And suddenly identity becomes invitation rather than inheritance. Food can guard a boundary, but it can also open a door. The same wedge can say ours and come taste this at the same time. Night settles over the market town, the family kitchen, the festival field, and the city shop. Bells fade. Knives are washed. Cloths are folded. Wheels return to shelves. A last crumb remains on the board, slightly oily against your fingertip. You taste it slowly. It is milk, salt, place, law, argument, memory, pride, and longing. Cheese has become a language without grammar, spoken through smell, texture, and the stubborn insistence that some flavours cannot be separated from the people who made them. In the quiet, you understand why cultures defend cheese so passionately. A rind is not just a rind. It is a border drawn in edible form. A name is not just a label. It is a claim to landscape and labour. A recipe is not just instruction. It is a family tree with better snacks. And as the village lights soften, you feel the calm weight of all those identities resting on wooden shelves, waiting to be cut, shared, debated, and remembered. You step into a city evening where rain shines on pavement and every window seems to hold a different version of hunger. Scooters hiss through wet streets. Neon signs blur in puddles. Somewhere, a kitchen fan hums above a line of cooks moving quickly in steam and golden light. The air smells of yeast, tomato, frying oil, garlic, charcoal, butter, and cheese melting into forms no ancient herder would recognize, though the appetite would be perfectly familiar. Cheese is everywhere now. You see it bubbling on pizza in a corner shop where the oven breathes heat like a small dragon. You see it folded into flatbread at a night market, crisp at the edges and soft within. You see it grated over pasta in a restaurant with candlelit tables. You see it tucked into dumplings, stretched across burgers, scattered over fries, whipped into desserts, pressed into sandwiches, and served on polished boards with fruit, honey, nuts, and little labels that make everyone pretend they know what grassy finish means. A mainstream historical fact sits right in the middle of this busy world. Cheese has become a global food through migration, industrial trade, refrigeration, restaurant culture, and the worldwide spread of dishes such as pizza, cheeseburgers, pasta, tacos, pastries, and snack foods. It no longer belongs to only one climate, one village, one herd, or one tradition. It moves through airports, freezer trucks, family recipes, street stalls, luxury dining rooms, school lunches, and midnight kitchens where someone stands barefoot, eating shredded cheese directly from the bag with the confidence of a person making private decisions. You enter a pizza shop and feel the heat press against your face. Dough slaps the counter with a soft thud. Sauce spreads in red circles. Mozzarella falls like pale rain. The peel slides into the oven, scraping stone. A few minutes later, the cheese is blistered, bubbling, and browned in tiny spots. When the slice lifts, long strands stretch toward the pan, refusing to break until they absolutely must. Everyone watches that stretch, even if they pretend not to. It is one of the small dramas of modern eating, and frankly, it has excellent timing. Then the scene shifts to a street stall under a canvas roof. Rain taps above you. A vendor griddles bread until it crackles, then folds salty cheese inside with herbs and a smear of chili. Your fingers feel the heat through thin paper. Steam curls upward, carrying the smell of toasted grain, sour milk, pepper, and smoke. You bite, and the outside shatters lightly while the centre pulls soft and warm. Around you, people eat standing up, balancing umbrellas, phones, bags, or an very ambitious hope that nothing drips onto their shirt. A quirky modern tidbit waits in the loud. Delicious world of global cheese mozzarella has become one of the most internationally influential cheeses largely because of pizza. And pizza itself has become so widespread that many people meet cheese first as stretch, melt, and comfort, rather than as a sliced wedge or aged wheel. A food once tied to particular milks and places becomes a visual effect, a craving, a social event, and sometimes a delivery app decision made while wearing pajamas. History can be majestic, but it can also arrive in a cardboard box. You move into a fine dining room where the lights are low and the plates are quiet enough to make people lower their voices. A server brings a cheese trolley with the solemnity usually reserved for legal documents. Soft rounds, blue wedges, hard shards, ash-coated logs, washed rinds, and tiny aged treasures sit in careful rows. The smell is powerful, earthy, creamy, nutty, mushroomy, and bold. You choose a small piece that looks harmless. It is not harmless. It blooms across the tongue with salt, cream, grass, cellar air, and a sharp little note that politely rearranges your thoughts. Here, cheese becomes luxury again, but in a new way. It is curated, explained, paired, photographed, and discussed. People ask about raw milk, animal breed, season, region, rind, aging time, and whether the goat had a meaningful childhood. The seriousness can be charming. It can also be slightly funny, because somewhere nearby, another person is melting a processed slice onto noodles and feeling equally blessed. Cheese has room for both reverence and convenience. That may be why it survives so well. Historians and food scholars still debate whether globalization is making cheese more diverse or more uniform. On one hand, supermarkets and chain restaurants spread a narrow range of familiar melts and mild flavors across the planet. On the other hand, small producers, food tourism, immigrant communities, online markets, and renewed interest in craft cheese have helped revive regional methods and introduce eaters to varieties they might never have encountered. The world is flattening and multiplying at the same time, which is inconvenient for neat conclusions, but excellent for dinner. You walk through a farmer's market where the morning is bright and cool. A maker cuts samples from a wheel made with milk from a small herd grazing nearby. The cheese is firm, golden, and slightly crystalline. You taste it, and the flavour feels rooted, like grass turned into memory. A few stalls away, another vendor sells a vegan cheese made from cashews, cultures, coconut oil, or other plant ingredients. It smells tangy and nutty. The texture is creamy, sometimes soft, sometimes sliceable, sometimes still learning what it wants to be. The rise of plant-based cheese shows that cheese is not only a food category, but the desire for richness, melt, tang, salt, and comfort. Some people avoid dairy for ethics, health, religion, environment, allergy, or preference. Makers respond with fermentation, fats, starches, nuts, legumes, and microbial cultures. Some results are impressive, some are earnest, some are, let us say, part of an ongoing journey. But the attempt itself reveals something important. Humans are not merely attached to milk, they are attached to the experience cheese gives them. You step into a home kitchen at night. The world outside is quiet. The refrigerator opens with a soft seal-breaking sigh, and cold light spills across the floor. Inside are leftovers, jars, fruit, and a wrapped piece of cheese waiting with patient dignity. You cut a slice. The knife meets slight resistance, then glides. The cheese is cool against your fingers. You eat it with bread, or fruit, or nothing at all. The taste is simple, salty, and steady. It does not need ceremony. It only needs attention for one small moment. Across the world, that moment repeats in countless forms. Paneer cubes simmer in tomato and spice. Halloumi squeaks against the teeth after meeting a hot pan. Queso fresco crumbles over beans. Feta sharpens greens and olives. Labneh thickens under olive oil and herbs. Cream cheese softens on warm bread. Raclette slides over potatoes in a glossy blanket. Cheese curds squeak in paper baskets. Mascarpone disappears into desserts. Cheese tea foams strangely and sweetly in plastic cups, proving again that human invention is fearless and occasionally difficult to explain to grandparents. You feel the global story not as conquest by one food, but as adoption. Cultures take cheese and make it speak their own mealtime language. Some melt it, some fry it, some brine it, some sweeten it, some age it until it becomes intense and crumbly. Some keep it fresh, mild, and white as morning. Cheese can be rustic, sacred, industrial, festive, nostalgic, luxurious, cheap, controversial, comforting, and faintly ridiculous. It is wonderfully unwilling to be only one thing. The modern world also asks harder questions. Dairy farming affects land, water, animals, labour, climate, and rural economies. Industrial supply can produce abundance, but also pressure farmers and standardise taste. Craft production can preserve skill, but may cost more than many families can afford. Cheese is pleasure, but not weightless pleasure. It sits inside systems of care, cost, and consequence. To eat with history in mind is not to ruin the meal. It is to understand the hands, fields, animals, machines, and choices that brought it near. Still, The oldest truth remains calm beneath all the complexity. Milk changes. Humans notice. Humans help it change in useful ways. Then they share it. That is the quiet thread running through every market, monastery, ship, factory, festival, restaurant, and kitchen. Cheese conquered cultures not by marching under a banner, but by fitting itself into ordinary need. It lasts, it nourishes, it travels, it comforts, it takes local flavour seriously. It accepts reinvention with surprising grace. Now the city grows softer, restaurant lights dim, ovens cool. Delivery bikes turn down quieter streets. In apartments high above the rain, people finish late meals. Someone folds pizza into one hand while answering a message. Someone wraps leftover cheese carefully for tomorrow. Someone teaches a child to sprinkle grated cheese over pasta, and the child uses far too much, as is correct. Somewhere, a maker turns a wheel in a silent aging room. Somewhere, milk is beginning to thicken. You stand at the window with the last bite resting in your palm. It is small, pale, and ordinary, yet it carries a vast human story animal breath in cold fields. Clay bowls near fires, temple storerooms, cave shelves, ship holds, market cries, factory steam, family tables, festival laughter, and the quiet refrigerator glow of a tired evening. You taste it slowly, and the world seems briefly held together by salt, fat, patience, and memory. The rain becomes softer now, almost a whisper. The streetlights blur into gentle circles, and the sounds of the city loosen, one by one, until they are only distant tires on wet roads, a closing door, a kettle sighing in another room. You let the final flavour fade, creamy and warm, no longer asking for thought, only allowing rest. The long story of cheese settles like a blanket across fields, oceans, kitchens, and sleeping towns. Milk has changed, people have changed, but the need for comfort remains tender and familiar. You breathe in, slow and easy. The night holds its quiet shape. Somewhere in the dark, a cellar is cool, a hearth is low, and tomorrow's hunger is already being met with patience.